There's always a moment in every Bridgerton season where the story quietly shifts from romance into something deeper. A moment where what looked like a simple love story suddenly becomes about identity, grief, loyalty, and the terrifying risk of opening your heart again. And if the Season 5 Part 2 trailer is hinting at anything, it is that this shift may already be happening beneath the surface, specifically in the storyline that has been quietly building around Francesca. Because if you step back and really look at where Francesca's journey ended in Season 4, it becomes clear that her story is not just continuing in Season 5, it is transforming. Francesca began her arc as the Bridgerton sibling who existed slightly outside the center of the family's chaos. Not distant in a cold way, but distant in the sense that her inner life always felt quieter, more private, more carefully guarded than the others. Where Anthony carried responsibility loudly and Eloise challenged society openly, Francesca moved through the world with a kind of calm restraint that made people assume she was untouched by the emotional storms surrounding her. But Season 4 shattered that illusion. The loss of John was not just a plot twist designed to add tragedy, it was a deliberate turning point for the character herself. Because the love Francesca shared with him was different from the sweeping, dramatic romances the show usually builds its seasons around. It was soft, stable, built on mutual understanding rather than overwhelming passion. The kind of relationship that feels less like fireworks and more like coming home after a long day. And when that kind of love disappears, the grief it leaves behind does not explode outward. It sinks inward. That is exactly how the show portrayed Francesca's pain. Not through dramatic breakdowns or emotional outbursts, but through stillness. Through the way she kept showing up to family gatherings, even when her eyes carried the quiet exhaustion of someone holding themselves together with sheer willpower. It was subtle, painfully subtle. And that subtlety is exactly why the storyline has so much potential heading into Season 5. Because grief that remains quiet rarely stays quiet forever. Eventually, it changes shape. And this is where Michaela enters the picture again. When Michaela first appeared in Francesca's life, the dynamic between them felt almost chaotic compared to the calm Francesca had built with John. Michaela's presence was louder, more impulsive, filled with energy that seemed completely out of sync with Francesca's natural rhythm. On paper, they should have struggled to connect at all, but something happened between them that the show handled with remarkable patience. At first, it was barely noticeable, small moments of conversation that lingered a little longer than expected. Shared glances that felt slightly more personal than polite society required. The slow realization that Michaela understood parts of Francesca's inner world that very few people had ever been able to reach. And then, John died, which complicated everything. Because suddenly, the emotional space between Francesca and Michaela was no longer simple friendship or easy companionship. It became layered with grief, loyalty, and an unspoken question neither of them seemed ready to face. Something about the Bridgerton Season 5 Part 2 trailer feels different. Not louder, not bigger, just heavier. The kind of heavy that settles in your chest before you can even explain why. Because if you look closely at what the show is setting up right now, this is not just another season about romance, scandal, and society gossip. This feels like a turning point for the entire Bridgerton world. A moment where the rules that held everything together might finally start to crack. The trailer does not shout it whispers it. In the way certain characters look at each other, in the way certain storylines are suddenly moving toward places the show has never gone before. And once you start connecting the threads left behind at the end of Season 4 with the small but very deliberate hints hidden in this first look at Season 5 Part 2, a much bigger picture begins to form. One that suggests the Bridgertons may be heading into their most emotionally complicated chapter yet. The real question is not whether the next season will be dramatic. The real question is whether we are actually ready for what the show is about to do next. There is something strangely unsettling about the way the Bridgerton world looks at the start of Season 5, Part 2. On the surface, everything appears to be settling. Benedict has finally found the love that eluded him for so long. Sophie has stepped into the Bridgerton family in a way that still feels slightly unreal even to the people around her. The household itself feels calmer than it has in years, almost as if the storm that defined the previous seasons has finally passed. But if you have watched this show closely, you know that Bridgerton rarely gives its characters peace without attaching a cost somewhere beneath the surface. And that is exactly the feeling the trailer leaves behind. Not chaos, not scandal, not immediate conflict, just a quiet shift in tone that feels intentional, almost like the story is taking a breath before something much bigger begins to unfold. Because when a show like this slows down instead of speeding up, it usually means the writers are positioning their pieces carefully. And right now, every character seems to be standing in a place that feels stable on the outside, but uncertain underneath. Take Benedict, for example. For years, his story was defined by searching for purpose, searching for identity, searching for a love that felt real enough to anchor him. And now that he finally has that love with Sophie, something interesting happens to his role within the family dynamic. He's no longer the wandering brother drifting between artistic ambitions and romantic uncertainty. He's settled, grounded, someone who has chosen a life that, by the rigid standards of Regency society, was not supposed to be possible for someone in his position. That choice alone quietly disrupts the social structure that the Bridgerton name has always existed inside of. Because Sophie is not simply another bride entering the ton with the approval of every influential family in London. Her story carries a different weight. She is someone who had to fight her way into a world that was never designed to accept her. And now she is not just visiting that world, she is part of it. Which raises a question the show has only just begun to explore. What happens when someone like Sophie becomes permanently embedded in a social circle that measures worth through lineage, wealth, and reputation? Bridgerton society may celebrate love stories, but it has never been particularly forgiving toward people who disrupt its hierarchy. And Sophie, whether she intends to or not, represents exactly that kind of disruption. The trailer hints at this in subtle ways, in the careful way certain members of the ton observe her, in the slightly restrained warmth of social gatherings where the Bridgerton name opens doors, but curiosity still lingers behind every polite smile. It is not open hostility, not yet. It's something quieter, something harder to confront. Judgment wrapped in courtesy. And Benedict, who has spent most of his life resisting the expectations placed on him, now finds himself in a position where protecting his happiness might mean challenging those expectations more directly than ever before. That shift matters because Benedict has always been the emotional heart of the Bridgerton siblings, the one who feels things deeply, sometimes recklessly, sometimes without fully considering the consequences. But marriage changes the way a character like him moves through the world. Suddenly, the stakes are not just about his own feelings anymore. Now, there is someone else whose place in society depends on how he chooses to stand beside her. And that creates a completely new kind of tension for the story moving forward. Because while the wedding may have looked like a conclusion, the truth is that it might only be the beginning of a much more complicated chapter for both of them. But the calm surrounding Benedict and Sophie is not the only thing that feels suspiciously fragile right now. If anything, their quiet happiness makes the rest of the Bridgerton. There's always a moment in every Bridgerton season where the story quietly shifts from romance into something deeper. A moment where what looked like a simple love story suddenly becomes about identity, grief, loyalty, and the terrifying risk of opening your heart again. And if the Season 5 Part 2 trailer is hinting at anything, it is that this shift may already be happening beneath the surface, specifically in the storyline that has been quietly building around Francesca. Because if you step back and really look at where Francesca's journey ended in season 4, it becomes clear that her story is not just continuing in season 5, it is transforming. Francesca